The rain drummed steadily against the windows of Adelaide Cottage as Prince William sat in his study, reviewing the endless stack of papers that had accumulated on his desk. The weight of his new responsibilities as Prince of Wales had been pressing down on him for months, each decision carrying more gravity than he had ever imagined. Kate was upstairs, helping the children with their homework, her gentle voice carrying down the hallway as she explained mathematics to Charlotte. His phone buzzed on the polished wooden desk, displaying an unknown number. William hesitated for a moment before answering, his voice measured and formal as always when taking unexpected calls. "Your Royal Highness," came the familiar voice of his private secretary. "We have received a request from the American media for a joint public appearance at Windsor Castle. They are particularly interested in a reunion between yourself, the Princess of Wales, and their Royal Highnesses the Duke and Duchess of Sussex." William's pen stopped moving across the document he had been signing. The silence stretched between them for several seconds as he processed the words. Harry and Meghan had been living their separate lives in California for years now, building their media empire and raising their children far from the scrutiny and protocol of royal life. The last time all four of them had appeared together publicly was at emotionally charged walkabout at Windsor following their grandmother's death, a moment that had been both healing and heartbreaking. "What is the nature of this request?" William asked carefully, setting down his pen and leaning back in his leather chair. Through the window, he could see the sprawling grounds of their estate, where his children often played and laughed without a care in the world. Those were the moments when the weight of his future kingship felt lightest. His secretary explained that there had been growing public interest in the possibility of reconciliation between the brothers. Recent polls showed that the British public, while supportive of the working royals, still held affection for Harry and curiosity about whether the family rift could be healed. The media request had come through official channels, suggesting it was more than mere tabloid speculation. William walked to the window as he listened, watching the groundskeepers tend to the gardens that Kate loved so much. She had spent countless hours planning and redesigning portions of their landscape, finding peace in the simple act of nurturing growth from the earth. Their life here had become a sanctuary, a place where they could be parents first and royals second. "Has this been discussed with His Majesty?" William inquired, knowing that any major royal appearance would need approval from King Charles. The relationship between his father and Harry remained complicated, though there had been some private correspondence in recent months. The conversation that followed was delicate and diplomatic. William learned that the king was indeed aware of the request and was leaving the decision to William and Kate. Charles had expressed hope that if such a meeting were to occur, it might serve as a bridge toward better understanding between the family members. However, he had also emphasized that no pressure should be placed on anyone to participate. As William ended the call, he found himself staring at a photograph on his desk taken during happier times. It showed himself, Kate, Harry, and Meghan at a polo match years earlier, all four of them laughing at some forgotten joke. Harry's arm was slung casually around William's shoulders, and the women were deep in animated conversation about something that had clearly delighted them both. Kate appeared in the doorway, having finished helping the children. She noticed the tension in her husband's shoulders immediately, the way his jaw tightened when he was wrestling with difficult decisions. After more than a decade of marriage, she could read his moods as easily as the weather. "What is it, darling?" she asked softly, crossing the room to stand beside him at the window. Her presence always had a calming effect on him, grounding him when the pressures of royal life threatened to overwhelm his sense of purpose. William turned to face his wife, seeing in her eyes the same strength and wisdom that had first drawn him to her all those years ago at university. Kate had never sought the spotlight, had never asked for the complicated life that came with marrying into the royal family, yet she had embraced every challenge with grace and determination. "We've been asked to consider a public appearance with Harry and Meghan," he said simply, watching as various emotions flickered across her face. Kate was always careful with her words, especially when it came to family matters, but William could see her mind working through the implications. They talked late into the evening, long after the children had been tucked into bed, and the house had settled into its peaceful nighttime rhythm. Kate listened as William shared his conflicted feelings about his brother. The anger that still simmered beneath the surface mixed with the deep love that had never truly disappeared. She spoke about her own complicated feelings toward Meghan, acknowledging the hurt while also recognizing the difficult position Meghan had faced as an outsider trying to navigate royal life. The conversation eventually turned to their children and the example they wanted to set. George, Charlotte, and Louis had grown up knowing they had an Uncle Harry and Aunt Meghan in America, but the complexity of those relationships had been shielded from them as much as possible. Kate and William had always tried to speak of family with love and respect, even when privately nursing wounds. "What does your heart tell you to do?" Kate asked as they prepared for bed, her hand finding his in the darkness of their bedroom. It was the same question she had asked him years earlier when he was deciding whether to propose, when the weight of changing both their lives forever had seemed almost unbearable. William was quiet for a long time, listening to the familiar sounds of their home settling around them. Somewhere down the hall, one of the children stirred and called out in their sleep before settling back into dreams. These were the moments that reminded him what truly mattered, what he was ultimately responsible for protecting and nurturing. The next morning brought crisp autumn air and the usual chaos of getting 3 young royals ready for their school day. As William watched his children eat their breakfast and chatter about their plans for the day, he thought about the complicated legacy they would inherit. The monarchy had survived for over 1,000 years by adapting to changing times while maintaining its essential values of duty, service, and family. His phone rang again as Kate was loading the children into the car for the school run. This time, the number was one he recognized immediately, though he hadn't seen it appear on his screen for many months. His thumb hovered over the answer button as Kate caught his eye through the car window, raising her eyebrows in a silent question. William took a deep breath and answered the call that would change everything. "Hello, Harry," he said quietly, his voice carrying across the ocean to a brother he had once shared everything with, and perhaps, with enough hope and courage, might again. The California sun was setting over Montecito as Prince Harry stood on the balcony of his home, watching his children play in the garden below. Archie was teaching his younger sister Lilibet how to kick a soccer ball, their laughter carrying on the warm evening breeze. These simple moments of family life had become precious to him, a stark contrast to the formal protocols and endless scrutiny that had defined his childhood. Meghan was inside, preparing for a video call with her business partners about the latest expansion of their media ventures. The couple had built something entirely their own in America, carving out space to raise their children with the freedom to be themselves while still maintaining their commitment to causes close to their hearts. Yet beneath the surface of their California dream, Harry often found himself thinking about home, about family, about bridges both burned and perhaps yet to be rebuilt. His phone had been buzzing all afternoon with messages from friends and advisors, each sharing the same piece of news that was spreading through royal circles like wildfire. The British media had gotten wind of the possibility of a reunion appearance at Windsor, and speculation was running rampant about whether the Duke and Duchess of Sussex would participate. When the call from his brother finally came, Harry had been expecting it for hours, though that didn't make answering any easier. The number appearing on a screen brought back a flood of memories from their shared childhood, late-night conversations when they were teenagers, the easy camaraderie they had once shared as they navigated the unique challenges of royal life together. "Hello, William," Harry replied, his voice carefully neutral. The formal tone felt strange after years of intimate brotherhood, but so much had happened between them that finding the right words seemed almost impossible. He could hear familiar sounds in the background of the call, children's voices, the distinctive slam of a car door that he remembered from countless mornings at various royal residences. The conversation that followed was tentative and careful, both brothers navigating around the landmines of their recent history while trying to focus on the matter at hand. William explained the media request and the potential benefits of a public show of family unity, while Harry listened with the wariness of someone who had learned to question every public gesture and its possible consequences. "What does Kate think about this?" Harry asked, genuinely curious about his sister-in-law's perspective. Despite everything that had happened, he retained respect for Kate's judgment and her deep understanding of both royal duty and public perception. She had always been thoughtful in her approach to family matters, even when those matters became painfully complicated. William's voice softened slightly as he spoke about his wife's reaction. Kate had been the one to suggest that any such appearance should be truly voluntary, with no pressure placed on anyone to participate. She had also emphasized the importance of clear boundaries and mutual respect if they were to move forward with such a public gesture. As the brothers talked, years of hurt and misunderstandings seemed to hover between them like fog. Harry thought about the last time they had all been together at Windsor, how raw and emotionally charged that day had been as they mourned their grandmother while the whole world watched. The public had seen unity, but privately, the tensions had been almost unbearable. "I need to talk to Meghan about this," Harry said finally, as honestly as he could manage. "This affects her too, and our children. We've worked hard to build a life here that protects them from the intensity of that world." William understood, though hearing it put so directly still stung. That world was his world, the world his children would inherit, the world he was preparing to lead. But he also recognized the validity of Harry's concerns and the courage it had taken for his brother to prioritize his family's well-being over royal expectations. After they ended the call, Harry remained on the balcony for a long time, watching as the sky darkened and stars began to appear. California's clear skies were so different from the often cloudy British weather he had grown up with, yet another reminder of how far he had traveled from his origins. When Meghan found him there an hour later, she immediately sensed the weight of the conversation he had just finished. She settled beside him on the outdoor sofa, not speaking at first, simply offering her presence as support while he processed his emotions. "William called," Harry said eventually, and he watched as Meghan's expression grew more serious. She had her own complicated relationship with the royal family, her own painful memories of rejection and misunderstanding that had led to their dramatic departure from royal life. As Harry explained the request for a Windsor appearance, Meghan listened with the careful attention she brought to all major decisions affecting their family. She asked thoughtful questions about the proposed format, the media involvement, and, most importantly, what message they would be sending to their children about family, forgiveness, and standing up for their values. "What do you want to do?" Meghan asked, echoing Kate's question from across the ocean. It was the central question that both couples were grappling with, each weighing their personal feelings against their public responsibilities and private hopes for the future. Harry admitted that part of him wanted to say yes, wanted to believe that genuine reconciliation was possible and that their children could grow up knowing their British family. Another part of him feared being manipulated for public relations purposes, worried that any gesture of goodwill would be exploited or misinterpreted by the very media machine they had worked so hard to escape. They talked late into the night, walking through their garden as their security detail maintained a discreet distance. Meghan shared her own reservations about returning to a place where she had felt so unwelcome, while also acknowledging that time and distance might have changed perspectives on all sides. The next morning brought a stream of phone calls from their representatives, each offering advice about the potential appearance. Some counseled against any involvement, warning that it could undermine their carefully constructed independence. Others suggested that a controlled reunion might actually strengthen their position and demonstrate their commitment to family despite their differences with the institution. As Meghan prepared breakfast for their children, she and Harry continued their discussion in the quiet moments between domestic responsibilities. Archie asked why Daddy seemed worried, his perceptive young mind picking up on the tension that his parents were trying to hide. Harry knelt down to his son's level, explaining in age-appropriate terms that sometimes families have disagreements that take time and effort to resolve. "Will we see Uncle William and Aunt Kate again?" Lilibet asked innocently, having heard her parents' conversation despite their attempts at privacy. The question pierced straight to the heart of what this decision really meant, not just for public perception or media coverage, but for the actual relationships between people who had once been close. By afternoon, Harry had reached a tentative conclusion about what he wanted to do, but he knew the final decision would need to be made together with Meghan. They had learned to approach major choices as a united team, considering not just their immediate feelings, but the long-term implications for their family and their values. The phone rang again as they were putting the children down for their afternoon rest, and this time the caller ID showed a number that made both Harry and Meghan pause. It was Kate, calling from her personal phone rather than going through official channels. As Harry answered, he could hear the genuine emotion in his sister-in-law's voice, a warmth that reminded him of easier times when they had all worked together toward common goals. Kate's call would prove to be the catalyst that finally helped them reach their decision, though not in the way any of them expected. "Harry," Kate said softly, "I think it's time we talked honestly about what we all really want for our families." Kate's voice carried across the Atlantic with a warmth that Harry hadn't heard in years. She was calling from her private sitting room at Adelaide Cottage, the afternoon light streaming through the windows as she gathered courage to say things that had remained unspoken for far too long. William was at an official engagement, giving her the privacy she needed for this delicate conversation. "I've been thinking about that day at Windsor," Kate said quietly, her words carrying the weight of carefully considered emotion. "When we walked together after grandmother's funeral. I know it was incredibly difficult for all of us, but there were moments when it felt like the four of us again, like we remembered what we used to mean to each other." Harry found himself transported back to that painful September day, remembering the surreal experience of walking beside his brother while cameras captured every gesture and expression. The public had seen a united front, but privately, the tension had been almost unbearable. Yet Kate was right. There had been fleeting moments when their shared grief had temporarily dissolved the barriers between them. "I think about it too," Harry admitted, settling into a comfortable chair in his study while Meghan listened from the doorway, having decided to join the conversation. "It reminded me that underneath everything that's happened, we're still family. We still care about each other, even when it's complicated." Kate's voice grew stronger as she continued. "I want to be completely honest with you, Harry. William and I have talked extensively about this proposed appearance, but more importantly, we've talked about what we really want for our children and yours. George asks about his cousin Archie sometimes, and Charlotte remembers playing with him when they were little." The mention of their children shifted the entire tone of the conversation. Harry felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen as Kate spoke about the next generation, about cousins who barely knew each other despite sharing unique royal heritage that few people in the world could understand. "Meghan is here," Harry said gently, "and she'd like to speak with you if you're comfortable with that." There was a pause, during which Kate could be heard taking a deep breath, preparing herself for the first direct conversation she had had with Meghan since their departure from royal life. "Of course," Kate replied, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of the moment. "Hello, Meghan." The conversation that followed was unlike anything any of them had expected. Instead of the formal politeness or careful diplomacy they had anticipated, both women found themselves speaking with surprising honesty about their experiences, their regrets, and their hopes for the future. Meghan acknowledged the difficulty Kate had faced in trying to help her navigate royal life, while also managing her own growing family and increasing responsibilities. Kate, in turn, expressed regret about times when she might have seemed distant or unwelcoming, explaining that her natural reserve had been misinterpreted as coldness when she had actually been struggling with her own insecurities about royal expectations. "I want you to know," Kate said carefully, "that I never stopped caring about your happiness and Harry's. When you left, part of me understood why, even though it was painful to lose you both from the family." Meghan's eyes filled with tears as she responded. I know this world wasn't built for someone like me, and I don't blame anyone for that. But I also know that Harry and I had to prioritize our own family's well-being, even when that meant making choices that hurt people we care about. As the conversation continued, both couples found themselves discussing not just the proposed Windsor appearance, but the deeper questions about family, forgiveness, and moving forward while honoring the past. Kate spoke about the pressure she felt to represent the monarchy with dignity while also being authentic to her own values. Meghan shared her ongoing struggles with public perception and her determination to use her platform for positive change. Harry eventually took the phone back, and the conversation shifted to practical considerations about any potential reunion. Kate suggested that if they did decide to move forward, it should be genuinely meaningful rather than a mere photo opportunity. She proposed that they focus on a cause that mattered to all of them, something that would demonstrate their shared values despite their different approaches to public service. What if we used this as an opportunity to highlight youth mental health initiatives? Kate suggested. It's something we've all worked on individually, and it might send a powerful message about the importance of emotional well-being and healing. The idea resonated immediately with both Harry and Meghan, who had made mental health advocacy a cornerstone of their work in America. The possibility of collaborating on something substantive, rather than simply staging a superficial reunion, appealed to their desire to make any public appearance genuinely meaningful. As they discussed potential formats and messages, the conversation gradually became less cautious and more animated. Ideas flew back and forth as they remembered what it felt like to work together toward common goals. The synergy they had once shared when combining their different strengths and perspectives. William returned home during the latter part of the call and was surprised to find Kate deep in animated conversation about mental health programming and youth outreach initiatives. When she mouthed Harry and Meghan to him, his eyebrows raised, but he listened as she explained the direction their discussion had taken. Taking the phone from his wife, William joined the conversation with cautious optimism. The brothers began talking about specific programs they had each developed, sharing updates about their respective charitable work, and finding common ground in their commitment to helping young people navigate mental health challenges. You know, William said thoughtfully, if we're going to do this, we should do it properly. Not just a walkabout or a photo call, but something that actually makes a difference. The conversation continued for another hour as they brainstormed possibilities. They discussed bringing together young people who had benefited from mental health programs, creating a forum for sharing stories and resources, and using their combined platforms to amplify messages about the importance of emotional support and professional help. Meghan suggested involving some of the young people they had worked with in California, while Kate proposed including representatives from the various UK organizations they supported. The idea grew more concrete and exciting as they talked, evolving from a simple public appearance into something that could have lasting impact. By the end of the call, all four of them were energized by the possibilities they had outlined. They agreed to continue the conversation over the following days, with staff from both sides working to develop more detailed proposals for consideration. As they said goodbye, there was a warmth in their voices that hadn't been there for years. Kate ended the call by saying simply, "It's good to talk to you both again," and Harry replied, "It's good to remember that we're on the same side." After hanging up, Harry and Meghan sat in their study for a long time, processing what had just happened. The conversation had shifted something fundamental in their understanding of where they stood with the royal family and what might be possible moving forward. "Do you think we can really do this?" Meghan asked, her voice filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Harry considered the question seriously before responding. "I think we could try. And maybe that's enough for now, just being willing to try." Outside their window, the California sun was setting again, but for the first time in years, Harry found himself thinking about home without the accompanying weight of hurt and regret. Perhaps it was possible to honor both his new life and his original family, to build bridges without sacrificing the independence they had fought so hard to achieve. The decision wasn't final yet, but the conversation had opened a door that had been closed for far too long. Whether they walked through it remained to be seen, but at least now they knew it was there. The days following the phone conversation were filled with careful planning and delicate negotiations that would determine whether the reunion could actually take place. Both families found themselves navigating not just their personal feelings, but the complex machinery of royal protocol, media management, and public expectations that surrounded any major royal event. At Adelaide Cottage, William and Kate worked with their private secretaries to develop a framework that could accommodate everyone's concerns while maximizing the potential positive impact of the appearance. They insisted that any event must have genuine substance rather than serving as mere spectacle, and they wanted clear agreements about media access and coverage to protect both families' privacy boundaries. Kate spent hours researching youth mental health organizations, reaching out to program directors and young advocates to gauge their interest in participating in such a high-profile event. She was particularly focused on ensuring that any young people involved would be properly supported and that their voices would be centered in the programming rather than overshadowed by royal celebrity. Meanwhile, across the ocean in Montecito, Harry and Meghan were having their own intensive discussions with their team about the risks and opportunities of re-engaging with the royal family in such a public way. Their advisors were split between those who saw it as a chance to rebuild important relationships and those who worried it could undermine their carefully constructed independence. Meghan spent considerable time speaking with the young people she had mentored through various American organizations, seeking their perspectives on whether such a collaboration could genuinely advance mental health awareness or whether it might feel performative and hollow. Their insights proved crucial in shaping her thinking about how to approach the opportunity. The logistics alone were staggering. Security arrangements had to be coordinated between British and American agencies. Media protocols needed to be established that would satisfy the legitimate public interest while protecting the family's children and personal space. Legal agreements were drafted to govern the use of any footage or photographs from the event. King Charles, who had been kept informed throughout the process, finally requested a private conversation with both his sons. The call, arranged for a quiet Sunday evening when both families could speak without the pressure of immediate deadlines, proved to be emotional and healing in ways none of them had anticipated. "I've watched both of you grow into remarkable men," Charles said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of complicated family dynamics. "You've each found your own ways to serve others and make a difference in the world. Perhaps it's time to see if you can do that together again, even if your paths remain different." The king's words carried special significance because they acknowledged the validity of Harry's chosen path, while also expressing hope for reconnection. Charles shared his own struggles with balancing royal duty and personal happiness, offering perspective that helped both brothers understand their situation in a larger context. During that same call, they discussed the practical realities of royal life that had contributed to the original rift. Charles acknowledged that the institution hadn't always adapted quickly enough to support family members who needed different approaches to public service. He expressed commitment to being more flexible in the future while maintaining the essential continuity of the monarchy. The conversation also touched on the grandchildren, George, Charlotte, Louis, Archie, and Lilibet, and the importance of not allowing adult conflict to deprive the next generation of family connections. Charles spoke movingly about his desire to be a present grandfather to all his grandchildren, regardless of geographic distance or family complications. By the following Tuesday, a basic framework had emerged that seemed workable for everyone involved. The event would be held at Windsor Castle, focusing on a roundtable discussion with young mental health advocates from both the UK and the US. The conversation would be filmed for later broadcast, with proceeds from licensing going directly to mental health organizations. Importantly, the format would emphasize the voices of the young people rather than the royal family members, positioning the princes and their wives as facilitators and supporters rather than the primary focus. This approach satisfied everyone's desire for the event to have genuine substance while also acknowledging the public interest in the reunion. The guest list was carefully curated to include young people who had compelling stories to share about their mental health journeys and the support they had received from various programs. Some were advocates who had worked with William and Kate's organizations in the UK, while others had participated in initiatives supported by Harry and Meghan in America. Security arrangements were finalized that would allow Harry and Meghan to bring their children to the UK for the visit, with private family time built in around the public event. This aspect was particularly important to Harry, who wanted his son and daughter to experience their British heritage while also maintaining the security and privacy protections they enjoyed in America. The media strategy emphasized the mental health focus while acknowledging the historic nature of the reunion. Interviews would be limited and carefully structured, with all four family members agreeing to participate in a joint conversation about the importance of mental health support for young people. As the final details were confirmed, each family member wrestled with their own emotions about what they were about to undertake. William felt a mixture of hope and apprehension, wanting to believe that genuine reconciliation was possible while remaining protective of his own family's stability and well-being. Kate found herself thinking about the example they would be setting for their children about family relationships, forgiveness, and the importance of putting aside personal grievances for larger purposes. She was particularly conscious of Charlotte's sensitivity to family dynamics and wanted to ensure their daughter saw healthy conflict resolution rather than ongoing tension. Harry experienced complex emotions about returning to Windsor, a place filled with both cherished childhood memories and painful associations with the pressures that had ultimately driven him away. He was determined to approach the visit with openness while maintaining the boundaries that protected his new life. Meghan prepared herself emotionally for returning to an environment that had been deeply challenging for her, while also feeling genuinely excited about the potential to contribute to meaningful conversations about mental health support. She had found her voice and confidence since leaving royal life, and she approached the reunion from a position of strength rather than vulnerability. The children in both families were prepared with age-appropriate explanations about the upcoming reunion and its significance. George, Charlotte, and Louis were told they would be meeting their American cousins for the first time in years, while Archie and Lilibet were excited about visiting their father's childhood home and meeting their British family. 3 days before their departure for England, Harry and Meghan took a quiet walk through their Montecito garden, reflecting on how much had changed since they first decided to leave royal life. They had built something entirely their own in America, established their independence, and found their voices, yet the approaching reunion represented a chance to integrate that growth with their original family connections. "Are we ready for this?" Meghan asked as they paused beside the vegetable garden where their children often helped plant and harvest. Harry looked back toward their home, where soft lights glowed in the windows, and their children's artwork was displayed proudly on the refrigerator. Then, toward the east where England waited with all its complications and possibilities. "I think we're as ready as we can be," he said finally. And maybe that's what courage really is, not feeling completely prepared, but choosing to try anyway. The next morning, they began their final preparations for a journey that would test whether time, distance, and personal growth had created space for healing one of the most watched family rifts in modern history. The morning of the Windsor reunion dawned clear and crisp, with autumn sunlight streaming through the ancient windows of the castle, where so much royal history had unfolded. Inside the state apartments, staff made final preparations for an event that would be carefully watched around the world, not just for its political implications, but for the deeply human story of family healing that it represented. William arrived early, walking through the halls where he and Harry had played as children during visits to their grandmother. The memories were everywhere, racing through corridors, hiding in alcoves, sharing secrets, and dreams when the weight of their future responsibilities seemed impossibly distant. He paused outside the room where the round-table discussion would take place, taking a moment to center himself for what lay ahead. Kate spent the morning with their children, who would meet their American cousins later in a private family gathering. She helped Charlotte choose a dress and answered George's questions about why this day was important to their family. Louis, still too young to fully understand the complexities, was simply excited about meeting new family members and playing in the castle gardens. The flight from California had been long, but peaceful, giving Harry and Meghan time to prepare themselves emotionally for returning to a place that held such complicated memories. As their plane descended toward London, Harry pointed out landmarks to his children, sharing stories about his childhood, while Meghan watched the familiar countryside unfold below them. Their arrival at Windsor was carefully choreographed to minimize media chaos while still acknowledging the historic nature of the moment. Security was extensive but discreet, allowing the family to enter the castle through private entrances away from the gathered photographers and reporters who had been documenting every detail of the reunion planning. The first meeting between the two couples took place in a private sitting room, away from cameras and officials. For several moments, they simply stood looking at each other, years of hurt and healing hanging in the air between them. It was Kate who moved first, crossing the room to embrace Meghan warmly, followed by a more tentative but genuine hug between the sisters-in-law. The brothers' greeting was more restrained but no less meaningful. They shook hands formally at first. Then, William stepped forward for a brief embrace that carried the weight of their shared history and the hope for their future relationship. "It's good to see you," William said simply, and Harry replied, "It's good to be home." The children's meeting was pure joy, unmarred by adult complications or media scrutiny. Archie, now 6, remembered some of his older cousins from brief earlier encounters, while little Lilibet approached her new relatives with the confident curiosity of a toddler who had been raised with love and security. George, Charlotte, and Louis were fascinated by their American cousins, immediately beginning to plan games and activities they could share. Before the public event began, the 4 adults spent time alone together, talking honestly about their hopes and concerns for the day ahead. They reviewed the format once more, ensuring everyone felt comfortable with their roles and the messages they wanted to convey about mental health support and family healing. The roundtable discussion itself exceeded everyone's expectations. The young advocates from both countries shared powerful, articulate stories about their mental health journeys, the support they had received, and their vision for reducing stigma and improving access to care. The royal family members served as thoughtful facilitators, asking questions that drew out important insights while keeping the focus on the young people's voices. One particularly moving moment came when a British teenager spoke about feeling isolated and different, and an American participant immediately connected with that experience, leading to a spontaneous conversation about the universal nature of mental health challenges across cultural and geographic boundaries. The royals exchanged knowing looks, recognizing the parallel to their own experience of finding common ground despite different circumstances. During a break in filming, Harry and William found themselves standing alone on a terrace overlooking the gardens where they had spent countless childhood hours. The conversation that followed was private, but observers noted the gradual relaxation in their body language and the occasional laughter that suggested genuine reconnection was taking place. "Do you remember when we used to plan how we would change the world when we grew up?" Harry asked, watching his son play with his nephew in the distance. "We still can," William replied. "Just maybe not exactly how we imagined it when we were 8 years old." Meghan and Kate, meanwhile, discovered that their shared experience of motherhood and their mutual commitment to supporting vulnerable young people provided a strong foundation for rebuilding their relationship. They talked about the challenges of raising children in the public eye and their determination to give their kids as normal a childhood as possible despite their extraordinary circumstances. The public portion of the event concluded with a joint statement from all 4 family members emphasizing their shared commitment to mental health awareness and their belief that family relationships, like individual well-being, require ongoing attention and care to flourish. They announced a collaborative fund that would support mental health programs in both countries, demonstrating that their reunion had produced concrete benefits beyond symbolic reconciliation. The media response was overwhelmingly positive, with commentators noting the genuine warmth that had developed between the family members throughout the day and the substantive focus on mental health rather than celebrity gossip. The young advocates who participated received widespread praise for their articulate contributions, achieving the goal of centering their voices in the conversation. That evening, the extended family gathered for a private dinner away from cameras and officials. King Charles joined them, clearly moved by seeing his sons together again and delighted to spend time with all his grandchildren. The conversation flowed naturally between serious topics and family humor, creating the kind of comfortable atmosphere that had been missing from their relationships for years. The children dominated much of the dinner conversation, sharing stories about their schools, friends, and interests with the uninhibited enthusiasm that only young people can bring to family gatherings. Watching them interact, the adults were reminded of what they had been working to preserve and rebuild, not just their own relationships, but the foundation for the next generation's understanding of family bonds. As the evening wound down, Harry and Meghan prepared for their return to California, but not before making tentative plans for future visits and ongoing collaboration on the mental health initiatives they had launched together. The goodbyes were warm and genuine, with promises to stay in better touch and to continue building on the progress they had made. Walking back to their car for the journey to the airport, Harry took Meghan's hand and looked back at Windsor Castle, illuminated against the night sky. For the first time in years, he felt at peace with both his past and his future, confident that it was possible to honor his heritage while building his own path forward. "How do you think it went?" Meghan asked as they settled into their car with sleepy children. "I think we remembered something important today," Harry replied, watching the castle disappear behind trees as they drove toward their flight home. "That love is stronger than hurt, even when it takes time to find its way back to the surface." The reunion had not solved every problem or healed every wound, but it had opened a door that had been closed for too long. In doing so, it had reminded them all that family relationships, like the institutions they represented, could evolve and adapt while maintaining their essential meaning and importance. Most importantly, they had given their children something precious, the knowledge that families can work through their difficulties and that love, patience, and mutual respect can create space for different approaches to the same fundamental values. As their plane lifted off from British soil, Harry and Meghan carried with them not just memories of a successful reunion, but hope for a future where family bonds could transcend geographic distance and personal differences. The Windsor reunion had become more than just a public appearance or a media event. It had become a testament to the possibility of healing, growth, and the enduring power of family love to bridge even the deepest divides. And in a world often defined by conflict and division, that message resonated far beyond the walls of the castle where it had been so beautifully demonstrated.